my fellow Americans, it has been the honor of my life to serve you. I won't stop. In fact, I will be right there with you as a citizen for all my remaining days. But for now, whether you are young or whether you're young at heart, I do have one final ask of you as your president. The same thing I asked when you took a chance on me 8 years ago. I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours. I'm asking you to hold fast to that faith written into our founding documents, that ideal whispered by slaves and abolitionists, that spirit sung by immigrants and homesteaders and those who marched for justice, that creed reaffirmed by those who planted flags from foreign battlefields to the surface of the moon, a creed at the core of every American whose story is not yet written. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. And God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
leaving the stage tonight after his farewell address, his message of thanks to the American people and his mission for them, a final call on all Americans to be a part of the democracy that made his presidency possible. The future, he said, is in good hands. There's a lot to discuss with our panel. CNN Chief Political Analyst Blair Borger, CNN Chief National Correspondent John King, Political Analyst John Avalon, Chief Political Correspondent Dana Bash, also CNN Political Commentator Bakari Sellers, former Georgia Republican Congressman Jack Kingston, political strategist Angela Rye, and Jody Cantor, New York Times reporter and author of the book, The Obamas. Gloria, quite a speech.
I think finally we had drama Obama tonight. Very emotional speech. Wiping a tear from his eye as he talked about the importance of his wife during his presidency and how proud he was of his children, and about Joe Biden, whom he called a brother. There was a speech about the responsibility of citizenship going forward, and I think that was, laced throughout this entire speech, which is what you can do going forward and how it cannot be governed by fear. And that was so important. It was a clear message from him. And my takeaway from it is this is a president who's very emotional about leaving office and a little bit worried about what's going to come next.
Also, John, giving a perspective of sort of how he sees the country, how he sees politics in America today, good and bad.
And at a time when we do tend to argue over every issue and play out the debate over every little issue or every tweet, shall we say, I think we should recognize the turning of the page and the closing of a chapter in our history. Number one, come up to 15 or 30,000 feet, because this is a huge moment. It was history. He himself saying a lot of you, the volunteers, didn't think it was possible. Back when he started to run, a lot of people didn't think he could get past the Clintons, get past the other people in the field, that the country was ready for its first African-American history. So as we talk about everything else that is important, we should recognize the turning of that page. The part that will be interesting is how is this process, and Congressman Kingston can help us at the beginning, by Republicans, many of whom I think will take it as a lecture. There was some clear admonitions, call them what you will, points of reference for the new president, President Trump, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about respecting Muslims, whether it's about celebrating diversity, respecting your critics and democratic institutions. He only mentioned the president-elect at the very beginning when he promised a smooth transition. But some of those were subtle, some of them not so subtle. Director joined us. Be interested to see how they're processed in the days and weeks ahead. John?
It was a progressive profession of faith, but it was rooted in deeply conservative values. It was rooted in deeply American values. He connected his political faith with the Founding Fathers, quoting George Washington. And I think brings the soaring context of the speech, roots it in his political faith in something deeper, in something transcendent, in something enduring. And while he confronted those forces of change, he very clearly also said that fear is the most destabilizing force in our democracy. And while he issued a warning about the future, it was rooted in reaffirmation of basic citizenship. And that's why I think ultimately it's uniting, not a partisan take.
It is also, as we think about the next president about to take office, I mean, their speaking styles could not be any more different. We are not going to be hearing a speech like this from a sitting president for the next 4 or 8 years.
Let's be honest. One of the main reasons, one of the many reasons Barack Obama did burst onto the scene is because of the way he gives his speech. I mean, he is an orator. That's just who he is. And that's why he can hit it out of the park like this. And you're absolutely right, Anderson. I mean, it's going to be a while. Who knows how long before we can hear a speech like this. And I think Republicans and Democrats alike say, if nothing else, he's a good orator. On that note, there's a couple of quick notes. As I was watching, I was remembering going with then Senator Barack Obama to Iowa on his very first trip to Iowa, and witnessing the response and the reaction that he had from the Democrats there. To John's point earlier about the fact that he sort of leapt over the people who were supposed to be next in line. And I had a chance to talk to him then, and I said to him, are you concerned that you're going to be like Idris, that you're flying too close to the sun? And here we are, 8, 9 years later, and he's a two-term president, and he did get a bit of a victory lap, which I'm sure a lot of people, it's the Rorschach test, who love him are happy that he gave, and people who don't are saying, really, are you not understanding this last election? But the one thing that I will say, and especially I'd be interested in our Democrats here, there's such a debate inside the Democratic Party right now as to which way to go. Do you go toward the lunch bucket economic issues, or do you stay with the sort of diversity issues and the racial divide in this country? And he really, in a way that almost only he could do, brought the two of them together by talking about the fact, and gave the Democrats a roadmap for that, by talking about the fact that, if you are, a minority, you also have to think about the middle-aged white man, who from the outside may seem like he has the advantages.
Which obviously a lot of Democrats, the Democratic Party has not done a good job
Precisely.
and has lost those voters as we
But it's a false choice. And I think that most people who want to see the Democratic Party in this country move forward understand that it's a false choice. We don't have to be a group of people as a country or as a party that looks and says, hey, we need to address flyover country or white rural America, or we have to address the issues of the Hispanic community, or we have to address the issues of other minority communities. In fact, we can do it all. And what President Obama did tonight was he talked about this level of empathy, which I thought was amazing. Because what Barack Obama did tonight was say that as a young African-American male, I have to step out of my skin and begin to understand what it feels like for the factory worker who, though I may assume he has some level of white privilege, actually just got laid off from his job. And that same factory worker then has to understand that I want my child to come home after being stopped by the police. And then we all have to understand that we're in this together.
You said we can do it all. I assume you're talking about the Democratic Party, but for human beings. But the Democratic Party did not do a very good job of that with this election. The criticism of Hillary Clinton is that she was playing to various groups, and it didn't work.
But I think we're missing what Barack Obama's speech was about tonight. Barack Obama's speech wasn't about yesterday, Anderson. Barack Obama's speech was about tomorrow. And so, yes, we can rehash how we lost in Scranton. We can rehash how we lost in Milwaukee. John King went up and down the board and showed where we lost these elections. But that's not what this is about. This is about how we're going to lead the future of this country and whether or not we're going to be together in this battle. We have all these breaking news stories about whatever's happening in Russia and Donald Trump. But what was refreshing tonight was that you got a chance to see grace, you got a chance to see dignity, you got a chance to see a man love his wife and be an amazing father, and that is the 44th president of the United States.
Congressman Kingston, obviously a Trump supporter.
I think what we saw tonight is reality meets Philadelphia. The last time I was in a big room like this full of enthusiastic Democrats was in Philadelphia, and there was so much optimism, and yet that optimism really is channeled to one man and one personality, and that's Barack Obama, and to some degree Michelle Obama, but it is not transferable to the Democrat Party. When you think, since he's been in office, 1,000 Democrat governors, congressmen, state representatives have lost because his enormous popularity, which we saw tonight. At one point somebody yelled out, "I love you," and the crowd went crazy. It was like a Justin Bieber concert in some ways, and I'll say that respectfully. But
There's no way that can be respectful.
It was respectful, and I won't retract it. But the reality, what I'm saying is that love was for a personality, not for a platform, not for a policy.
Angela, to the Congressman's point, you can't argue the Democratic Party is in some level of confusion at this stage. You might even say disarray.
Yeah, so is the Republican Party, actually, and all of our parties. And I think part of that has to do with where we are in this country right now, which is people rejecting labels and boxes and all of that. That's a global phenomenon. But I think it's really important for us to take a step back and think about what the president said tonight. He talked about things that are threats to our democracy. He put on not only his State of the Union hat, he put on his constitutional law professor hat, he put on his founding fathers hat, and he said, we have a threat with economic opportunity. We have an issue with racism. We have an issue with factless debate in our politics. And finally, we have an issue with taking our democracy for granted. It is so important for us to not look at that through partisan lenses. Because as he said, when we begin to do that, when we begin to take some of these things for granted, that's how we end up in war. That's how we end up not really deeming ourselves as patriotic. This isn't about a Justin Bieber concert. It's not about a Barack Obama as a personality. It's about a Barack Obama who's always been able to see the hope of what America can become, the hope of a more perfect union.
There was also a very sobering tone to this speech. If we think of Barack Obama as somebody who began his national political career by talking about optimism and hope and change and unity and progress, he ended his presidency by defending certain things that we didn't think a few years ago needed defending. Science, basic facts, journalism, the ability of citizens to talk to each other on the most fundamental level. So though I did hear the optimism in the room that you're reflecting, I also heard a great level of concern about that. I also want to say something about, to shout out to Michelle Obama. I have tried to report the story of the Obama partnership and how it has affected this presidency, but I believe that it is so subtle and deep and fascinating that we'll have to hand the batons to the historians. Michelle Obama is the person who really pushed Barack Obama to become the politician she wanted him to be. She saw him as a lofty, above-it-all figure. She wanted him to have a different kind of presidency, a very elevated presidency. And just the way Jackie Kennedy was in many ways the architect of the Kennedy vision, I think we're going to say the same thing about Michelle Obama in the future. That is in some way her version of the presidency.
I think Barack Obama admitted that tonight. I mean, he said, I wouldn't be the president I am without her. But to your point, Jody, also, he began on hope, and he talked a lot tonight about not giving in to fear.
Yes.
This was a major theme of this speech. He said, you know, we should be vigilant, but we can't be afraid. And democracy can buckle when it gives into fear. And I think what he was telling the American public was, don't do that because you're going to destroy the Constitution. And this was his parting point, I think, and maybe it was part of the constitutional scholar in him, but I also think it was his way of saying, if you give in to fear, then you lose the hope you came in with.
This was a fascinating farewell address. I mean, first of all, most farewell addresses are in the Oval Office, think Eisenhower, or they're open letters to the American people. Here you have almost a rally-type environment to the hometown crowd. But what's consistent is the role of the warning offered by departing presidents. Think about Eisenhower's warning about the rise of the military-industrial complex. And so Gloria's right. There was a discussion about not giving into fear, about some of the global challenges, from fact-free media to taking our democracy for granted, to a wave of a liberal democracy taking over the Western world right now, potentially. But that is part of a tradition in upon itself, of a departing president not only offering a valedictory for his own presidency, but a warning about the values we need to hold fast to amid the darker currents of change.
There's also with presidents, they talk more on policy because there's more achievement to talk about. And I would just say respectfully, why didn't he brag about Obamacare? Why did he brag about it? He mentioned it in passing, and he did not say, here's what's great about it. And then he should have talked about ISIS.
That wasn't the purpose of tonight. And
I know it wasn't, because he wants to lecture.
No,
I understand.
You didn't. Tonight was not about me coming down and telling you in the State of the Union what we have accomplished and what we're going to accomplish tomorrow. But here, Congressman, no. What we need to hear is there are a lot of people in this country on both sides that are afraid. There are a lot of people in this country that are angry. And what he did today was trying to stand in that gap, and he challenged you as a middle-aged white man from Georgia who's a Republican.
Are you thinking about people?
No, but he challenged.
No, you're sitting right here.
Just listen, Jack, because he challenged me as well. He challenged Anderson. I mean, he challenged all of us to make this a more perfect union. This wasn't about the fact that we have 20 million more people on health care, or the stock market's nearly at 20,000, or that more people are employed now, or that we have 2 million people less in poverty. This wasn't about that.
Well,
this was about
actually, though, I think it was about that. And I don't think he expanded on it. And I don't think he depended. You go back to Reagan's
Do you think that's what? I mean, does the American people want yet another speech in which a politician is touting all their accomplishments?
To talk about another speech. Reagan's farewell speech, he talked about opening up the Soviet Union. He talked about the relationship with Gorbachev. And then he warned the coming administration. He said, you've got to cut the cards. That was his exact phrase. Trust but verify. I would have liked to have seen him say, and I'm passing the baton on, and I want to give you the warning.
Just a little bit of perspective. If he would have
done more than he did, which I guarantee you many of your colleagues and maybe your former constituents think he gave way too much of a victory lap here. He would have been accused of lecturing too much. But also remember, Reagan was passing the baton to his vice president who was becoming the president. And so he doesn't have that luxury. But I hear what you're saying. The one thing that I will say is that, again, sort of even listening to our partisan friends here, you're kind of proving his point. We're all proving his point that he's trying to say, of course he's a partisan figure. He is a president. He is a politician. But he was trying tonight, genuinely so, I think, to not be that, to be the president and to say, guys, we need to figure out a way around this. And I also think that, to me, one of the best lines on that note, and it got a standing ovation here, was stop arguing with each other on the internet. Actually look at a stranger in the eye, in person, and have a conversation.
John?
I think to that point, number one, the congressman does raise a legitimate question about his effectiveness in the post-presidency. How does he choose? What organization does it take? What form does it take? Because when it hasn't been about him, I don't mean this as harsh as it sounds, but in 2010, 2014, and 2016, the Democrats got decimated, and he was the president of the United States in all three of those elections. When he has not been at the top of the ballot, the Democrats have suffered. So what form does it take? But I also think, as the guy who started as a community organizer, we're at a very interesting time in our politics because all big institutions, including the Democratic and the Republican Party, don't have anywhere near the sway they used to have. They don't have. Donald Trump just blew up the Republican Party. He was not its candidate, and the Democratic Party National Democratic Party is in bad shape right now. His message seemed to be, start this in your community, organize locally, and then expand the circle, and if you're really mad, get the petition signed and run yourself.
Beyond what people project on this president, this was not a partisan speech. This was not a polarizing speech. When he quotes Atticus Finch, that's a way of reaching out in a transcendent way and not the literature. And right, exactly, your people, Jack. And the ultimate message is that our independence is inseparable with our interdependence.
Yes.
And that's an enduring message for the ages, rooted in the founding fathers, carried forward to today.
I think what the president was saying, and ironically, you have a president which state and local governments have been hollowed out of Democrats at the local level under his presidency. We know that's a fact. However, what he is saying now, and they've admitted it, they didn't pay enough attention to that, and what he's saying now is start at the bottom again. We gotta start at square one. Here we are. You have to organize. He said, get out there, go do it, and that's how we have to work our way back. So if I had to guess what, and they've talked about organizing for America now, is now going to be a grassroots organization again to start all over. He will be involved in that.
Well, that does get to the question of what he does now. I mean, he's 55 years old. He talks about still being involved as a citizen.
Yeah.
But is it clear what that means at this point?
I think there's so clear, First of all, he really is the ultimate author president. When he was younger, he told people he was a writer before he was a politician. So I believe that he will write one of the richest and most fascinating presidential memoirs because he'll have to make a choice between being really direct and being really honest, which makes a really good book, and being really politic. But in tonight's speech, I think we also saw Obama recognize a paradox, which is that often the less partisan you appear, the more effective of a partisan you can be. If after the presidency, he comes out and just becomes like another partisan warrior, right, who's in the trenches, he will be much less powerful than if he retains the respect and the dignity of the office. That was always an Obama strength, and I think we'll see him try to hoard that and play it up in years to come.
A couple of things here. I think, yes, he's obviously going to write a book, but I also think it's important to note, I think they realize now that OFA actually crippled the Democratic Party. So I would be really surprised to see if he leaned into OFA in that way. I think they realize that there are a number of things that they have to do to rebuild the DNC, one, and I think two, he's talked about wanting to go in and train young leaders like they started right after he was elected to the Senate, knowing that there does need to be a younger bench. I think the third thing is he's going to lean into this foundation. He's just now starting to get the foundation team together. He's going to do it from D.C., but that's a big thing for him, and then I think we're going to see him chase some business pursuits later on.
But also, I think it was clear, he was pretty clear earlier this week, I think it was, or last week, about the fact that he would jump in and Donald Trump was going to send 800,000 children back home. I mean, he talked about DACA, and today we actually saw in Sessions' confirmation hearing that they would be willing to abandon that. So, I mean, he's talked about the policy points in which he would come out. But I do want to harp on one thing that he talked about tonight in his speech. And it's two things that are the cornerstone of our democracy, and it was kind of played out by Jack and I's interaction. It's that not only do you have to be willing to challenge and talk about the things that make our democracy the most amazing thing in the world, but you also have to be willing to listen. That's very important. And the other thing, which I'm kind of speaking to my Republican friends right now, but I'm speaking to all of us, I guess, like the president did, is you have to be willing to love your neighbor even if they don't love you. And I mean, I think that was something that he really harped on today by just talking about these groups of people who feel beat down in this country, whether or not you are unemployed or whether or not you're going through problems with your, gaining civil rights. I just thought tonight was a night that booked in an incredible ascension to, the 44th presidency.
I think he's somebody who's, and he said, in terms of talking about what our politics has become, it now seems as if he's starting to stand outside of it a little bit and critique what our politics has become, and I think he sees himself as a useful critic that way, saying that it's not only become dishonest, he said, but now we have a selective sorting of the facts, and our politics have become self-defeating.
Well, one of the things,
self-defeating.
Let me speak a little bit on that, kind of, as the white guy. He said we would not deny that racial relations are better today than they were 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know anybody who's debating that, but I think you could debate, are racial relations better today than they were 8 years ago? And I don't feel like they are. I remember when he was sworn in, I had 11 young people stay in our house, and it was a great racially mixed group, full of optimism, Democrats and Republicans, and mostly students who, not really sure. And I feel a sense of after Ferguson and after Baltimore and after Milwaukee, here was a man who could have been really, really good in terms of being proactive, but I don't think he was.
Yeah, I just want to get just some final thoughts here because we're going to be tossing over to Don Lemon. I mean, do we know? It is interesting, John Avlon, to hear you putting this speech in the context of other farewell addresses.
Yeah. Look, it is a great American tradition. He quoted Washington's farewell address very directly, and he rooted a lot of his ideas and his projection forward in the Founding Fathers. But it's part of that communion, that conversation between presidents. And farewell addresses tend to be part valedictories. They're trying to bridge the past, the present, the future, but they always contain a warning about the storm clouds on our horizon. He definitely did that tonight.
And John King, between now and Inauguration Day, are we going to be hearing from President Obama?
We will hear from him if there are official business of government to take care of. This was done by design. President Bush did the same thing. You have some space. You have some space to have the grace. There's inauguration planning. The confirmation hearings are underway. And President Bush, as President Obama said, is very graceful, and he's trying to do the same thing. We know he has many differences with Donald Trump. We heard some of them out tonight in this speech, but he views it his responsibility to say farewell, and then unless some official act of the presidency has to come up, to largely step aside.
And President Obama, who has been greeting people in this crowd, many of whom have worked on the campaigns of President Obama over the last 8 or I guess 10 years, probably even some of his Senate race, are in the hall, and he spent a lot of time greeting them, talking to them. I want to thank everybody on the panel. It has been an extraordinary night here in Chicago. History. Time now to turn things over to Don Lemon and CNN Tonight.
Thank you very much. A very emotional speech. What a speech there. The Obamas have left the building. A speech given by the president now with his family in the front row, making his farewell address to America from the McCormick Center in Chicago. We're following that big story tonight in the news. Plus, we're also following this bombshell information on Russia and the president-elect. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Thank you so much for joining us. President Barack Obama comes full circle, making the final speech of his presidency in the place where it all began.
You were the change. You answered people's hopes. And because of you, by almost every measure, America is a better, stronger place than it was when we started.
And meanwhile, our CNN exclusive, and it is shocking, classified documents presented last week to President-elect Donald Trump, including allegations that Russian operatives claim to have been compromising personal and financial information about him. That's according to multiple U.S. officials with direct knowledge of the briefings. We'll discuss all of that. I want to get right to CNN's Carl Bernstein, our political commentator. Also CNN's Jim Sciutto, our chief national security correspondent. Gentlemen, good evening to you, Jim. This is explosive. It's an exclusive. Some exclusive reporting for us that the nation's top intelligence officials briefed the president-elect and the current president last week about claims of Russian efforts to compromise the president-elect. What exactly are you learning?
That's exactly right, Don, and a lot of teamwork went into this. Multiple U.S. officials with direct knowledge of these briefings tell CNN that classified documents on Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election presented last week to President Obama and President-elect Trump included these allegations that Russian operatives claim to have compromising both personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. The allegations, part of a 2-page synopsis based on memos compiled by a former British intelligence operative whose past work U.S. intelligence officials consider to be credible. The FBI is now investigating both the credibility, the accuracy of these allegations against the president-elect, which are based primarily on information from Russian sources. But I should make clear, it has not confirmed many essential details in these memos about Mr. Trump. These classified briefings, I'll remind our viewers, last week were presented by 4 of the senior-most U.S. intelligence chiefs: the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, the FBI Director, James Comey, CIA Director, John Brennan, and NSA Director, Admiral Mike Rogers. This 2-page synopsis also included allegations, this is important as well, that there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. This according to 2 national security officials. CNN has confirmed the synopsis was included in those documents presented to Mr. Trump. We cannot confirm if it was also discussed in his meeting with intelligence chiefs. We've reached out multiple times to the Trump transition team for comment. They have not commented. Neither has the Office of the Director of National Intelligence or the FBI. I should note there was a tweet, though, from the president-elect which appeared to reference our story, the president-elect calling it, in his words, fake news. There it is, fake news, a total political witch hunt, he said.
Of course, that's not surprising. And also the legitimacy of these documents and confirming them, that's going to be what the transition team tries to do, to say, that they can't be corroborated. Even Kellyanne Conway tonight, there is a comment from Kellyanne Conway. Jim, she was on Seth Meyers' show tonight, and she was asked about your reporting, and here is how she responded.
Well, guess what hasn't happened, Seth? Nobody has sourced it. They're all unnamed, unspoken sources in the story, and it says it was based on a Russian investigator to begin with. So where are we?
It was based on an MI6 British investigator.
Right. Well, one of those, and then it said that it also may have originated with a Russian investigator. It also says that Hillary Clinton and groups that wanted Hillary Clinton to win may have been behind the investigations themselves. And most importantly, it says that the FBI is trying to confirm it. So nothing's been confirmed. And I have to say, as an American citizen, regardless of your party or if you don't like politics at all, which are many Americans, we should be concerned that intelligence officials leak to the press and won't go and tell the president-elect or the president of the United States himself now, Mr. Obama, what the information is. They would rather go tell the press.
But the report was the press report was about them going to the president.
And it says that they never briefed him on it, that they appended two pages to the bottom of his intelligence report.
I believe it said they did brief him on it.
Oh, he has said that he is not aware of that.
Jim, what's your reaction to that?
Well, there were a couple factual inaccuracies in there, but let's get to the big picture. The big picture is that, yes, it is true, these allegations have not been confirmed, but the fact is you now have multiple bodies here in Washington that are taking them seriously. That includes the intelligence community, which took the really extraordinary step of including this in briefings, intelligence briefings to the president and the president-elect, 1. 2, the FBI is investigating these allegations now. They're taking them seriously. And the fact is, it is not a partisan issue because Republican and Democratic lawmakers are also taking them seriously. We've spoken to lawmakers of both sides, senators and House members that are taking them seriously. Again, they have not confirmed the veracity of the allegations, but also, and this is key, Don, they're not dismissing them.
Yeah,
and that's an important point.
The other factual inaccuracies, first you, Jim, and then Carl, was it presented to the president and the president-elect?
It was indeed, in the
wasn't-
briefing materials.
So that she was wrong on that account.
Well, she claimed, and we made this distinction in our story, we know that it was included in the briefing materials presented to both the president and the president-elect. And let's keep in mind, they don't put garbage in briefing materials, okay? They just don't waste the time of the senior-most people in this country with that kind of thing. But I will caveat, and this is important, this may have been what she was referring to, we do not know that it was also discussed at the briefing, that they went into this in depth. Including the materials, we don't know that it was also part of the verbal discussion between those involved.
But it was in the original document.
It was.
Yes, okay. Go ahead, Carl. What's your response?
Well, my response is that this is an extraordinary development in the sense that the senior intelligence chiefs of the United States of America have taken this body of information and decided that going into a new presidency, they are going to ensure that there will be a full investigation of these allegations. And it's very true that we do not know the accuracy of these 35 pages of allegations that come from Russian operatives whose information was given ostensibly to a former MI6 British intelligence operative. The backstory of this is kind of interesting.
Yeah,
The way this came about was that